Hello, viewers, it's Josie. Welcome back to Eclectic Movie Reviews. And the day of this recording is July 8th, 2025. It is hazardously hot outside, and so I have my air conditioner on, so forgive the noise. So today I'm going to give a couple of movie reviews, and talk about some of my favorites of the year I've seen so far. Movies that stood out to me so far. I won't be able to talk about everything I've liked, of course, because that would be too long. But let's start off. I'm going to do it alphabetical as always. Let's start off with Black Bag, directed by Steven Soderbergh, screenplay by David Koepp. This is an awesome spy thriller mystery. Sleek direction from Steven Soderbergh and sharply clever writing from David Koepp. For those of you who do not know, the story follows a married couple named George and Catherine Woodhouse, played by Michael Fassbender and Cate Blanchett, who were officers for the SIS, or MI6, I believe it's called, the Secret Intelligence Service in the UK. They have four other friends, two couple pairs, who are British intelligence officers, alongside them, played by Tom Burke and Melissa Abela, and Naomi Harris and Reg John Page. Woodhouse's boss informs him that there has been some disclosure of a classified software program called Cerberus, and that one of the members, in their spy circle, if you will, is the culprit in it. George starts to wonder if Catherine is the betrayer in all of this. Of course, it's not that simple. For certain, the film effectively built suspense and tension to its conclusion. In just 90 minutes, what I love about Koepp's screenplay is that he's focused on it being a character-driven narrative first, without it being too boggled down by super heavy plot point references to international relations or spy tech jargon. Most of the story is about couples' communication or lack of it. Much of the story, and Soderbergh and Koepp are playing on the idea that being a spy is essentially lying for a living, or telling some truths, but not all. And also part of being a spy is also telling the truth. It's a little bit of both. And that's what makes this movie funny. This is sort of a weird comparison, but much of the jokes in the sitcom Friends were about how nobody was honest with each other, and somewhat likewise, it's kind of like that in Black Bag, wondering who's telling the truth and who's not. And in a way, Black Bag also reminded me of So I Married an Axe Murderer, because they both feature husbands suspecting their wives of being potential criminals. For Mike Myers' character, it would be suspecting his wife of being an axe murderer, and for Michael Fassbender's character, it would be suspecting his wife of national treason. David Koepp consulted with actual spies in order to write the most grounded narrative possible. Obviously, while this is fiction, and I would imagine there are elements of the spy profession depicted that are completely dramatized, it plays out closer to how I would imagine the SIS would operate out in the real world. David Koepp and Steven Soderbergh smartly balance the grounded realism with the dark humor. Ironically, Koepp and Soderbergh sort of poke fun at classic noir and espionage movie tropes through this approach to the genre. And Michael Fassbender and Cate Blanchett, super hot chemistry. They both of them look so amazing. Cate Blanchett just looks so great for her age, and Michael Fassbender too. They're both outstanding actors. I love them both. I think this film is more topical than given credit for with Cerberus because of the rise of technology. In the Netflix film Hitman from last year, starring Glenn Powell, there was this whole thing brought up about how hitmen don't really exist. Spies do exist, but I don't know if it's as exaggerated as it is in something like James Bond or Mission Impossible. Then again, you never know. The actual day-to-day work of spies in real life is a mystery. But yeah, that's Black Bag. It's awesome. You should watch it. It's currently streaming on Peacock, and it's on Blu-ray and DVD. So see if it's at your library. I showed it to my mom on Blu-ray, and she loved it. Next up is The Day the Earth Blew Up, Looney Tunes movie directed by Peter Braungart. Porky and Daffy have been best friends and basically stepbrothers since childhood. In fact, they were brought up on the same farm raised by Farmer Jim. It is assumed that Farmer Jim passed away, so Porky and Daffy are left on their own to figure stuff out. There's this montage of them trying out different professions, and none of them work. That part sort of reminded me of Step Brothers when they go out to look for jobs and none of them click because they're such idiots. And while both Daffy and Porky are goofy characters, after all, they are Looney Tunes, Porky is the more rational of the two. Porky is the one who has to watch after Daffy's eccentric, borderline dangerous antics. What's interesting is that Daffy, for the most part, genuinely means well. They both are trying to do the right thing, but Daffy may be going about in ways that are a bit extreme, to say the least. One night, Daffy and Porky go out to dinner and at a diner, and Porky meets Petunia Pig. Of course, it's love at first sight. They strike up a conversation, and she gets Porky and Daffy a job at a gum factory. And people start chewing gum and then start acting like zombies. Daffy comes to the conclusion that it's a part of some alien invasion conspiracy, so it's up to Daffy, Porky, and Petunia to save the day. The alien in the movie is voiced by Peter MacNicol, and he is hysterical. This movie satirizes conspiracy theories, but not in an obnoxious way. Rather, in a more accessible way that kids can understand and that doesn't take sides. If you know what I mean. The film is also a meta-commentary on how major film studios have become like assembly line factories for formulaic blockbusters. The Day the Earth Blew Up is one of the most smartly written animated films I've seen in recent years. The comedic writing is so clever. In a perfect world, this would be Oscar nominated for not only a animated feature, but adapted screenplay as well. So The Day the Earth Blew Up is currently available to watch on HBO Max, but you can also get it on Blu-ray and DVD from your library. So, sorry guys, I'm just looking through my pages. Another film that I found funny was Friendship, directed by Andrew Young, his first feature. I believe Craig, played by Tim Robinson, works for a marketing company. He's married with a son. His wife is played by Kate Mara. She's a cancer survivor. They have a teenage son played by Jack Dylan Grazer. Austin, played by Paul Rudd, moves next door. Craig and Austin become friends. Things get odd and disturbing. On paper, this movie doesn't sound original, but the execution is almost surreal and otherworldly. Because Craig is a man-child, he gets himself and Austin, for that matter, in such cringy, disturbing situations, so much so that it's anxiety-inducing, almost in a Curb Your Enthusiasm kind of fashion. Friendship certainly won't be for everybody's taste, but if you want a good dark comedy and if you like oddball protagonists, definitely give this a watch. It's kind of like, I like to consider it like a cross between The Banshees of Inisherin and The Jerk with Steve Martin. I'll actually be talking about Steve Martin in just a short bit. You'll see. Next up, I'm going to talk about Materialist, written and directed by Celine Song. Now, there's been some very weird discourse on this movie. I personally loved it. This is a thought-provoking look at materialism in the world of dating and of modern dating. Celine Song pokes fun at how individuals look to superficial qualities in others. Not just with dating, but in life in general, in terms of how people define themselves as human beings. And their whole, the film explores how many tie material wealth and gain with personal self-worth. Many reviews of the film have pointed out that it was advertised as a fluffy love triangle, but that is a surface level, not not even read, but rather glance at the film. Like Past Lives, Materialist takes a more mature approach to the love triangle theme, if you can even call it that. Chris Evans and Pedro Pascal do not actively compete against each other for Lucy's heart, Lucy played by Dakota Johnson, as they would in the hands of a lesser filmmaker. In fact, they don't have a conversation together. The only scene I think they really share together is when Lucy and Harry go to John's play. Harry is Pedro Pascal and John is Chris Evans, for those of you who don't know. Of course, John, Chris Evans, would rather Lucy be with him, but at that moment, he's accepting of her being in a relationship with someone else. In the hands of a lesser director, Chris Evans' character would be the nice guy and Harry would be the asshole. Harry is not an asshole. Quite the contrary. He's a really nice guy. He wants to make connections with people as he's living an isolated life of material meaninglessness. Even with material wealth, Harry is still insecure. Regardless of whether or not Harry and John are nice, the reality is that in order for a healthy, stable relationship to take place, to occur, a strong foundation must be set. That would entail a positive self-concept and being self-sufficient. Certainly, John's financial instability led to him and Lucy's initial breakup, but I would also factor in his low self-esteem and inability to take care of himself. He had to experience a self-actualization journey. Celine Song is married to Justin Kuritzkis, who wrote Challengers, and that's another film that deals with a love triangle. Though I would consider that more manipulative lust than real love. When the trailer for Challengers came out, Past Lives had already been released, and there were those wondering what was going on in their marriage since they were depicting relationship triangles on screen. To that end, I would say comparing Past Lives and Materialist to Challengers is like apples and oranges. They're not alike. They're really not alike at all. When Challengers came out, the film I compared it to the most was actually Todd Haynes' May December. I say that because the way May December critiques actors, Challengers does similarly with celebrity athletes. However, I will say that one commonality that Materialist has with Challengers is the critique of superficially based relationships. The entertainment value in actors does not come from wondering who gets with who. That's irrelevant because these are horrible people. They're just awful people. Zendaya's marriage to Mike Feast is not based on love, but rather maintaining status as in competitive sports. She gets a high off of the winning and the money that comes from tennis. And she gets a high off of Mike Feast and Josh Connor, the washed-up tennis star Josh O'Connor, competing for each other. But that's a whole other video. Celine Song listed her influences for Materialist, and she included Phantom Thread from Paul Thomas Anderson, James L. Brooks' Broadcast News in Terms of Endearment, Mike Leigh's Secrets and Lies, and Life is Sweet. Song also mentioned that she was inspired by Jane Austen novels. It reminded me a lot of the this reminded me actually of a lot of the early films of Whit Stillman. His trilogy in the 90s, Metropolitan, Barcelona, and The Last Days of Disco, they all very much satirize yuppie culture and pretentiousness. It's funny, the red-haired guy in whatchamacallit, or Metropolitan is like a pretentious yuppie version of Archie. Another film Materialist made me think of was Shop Girl from 2005, starring Claire Danes, Jason Schwartzman, and Steve Martin, which is a really great underrated gem. For those of you who do not know, Shop Girl is about a young aspiring artist named Mirabelle, played by Claire Danes, who works at a Beverly Hills Saks. She sort of starts a situationship with a kind of an aloof slacker named Jeremy, played by Jason Schwartzman. She likes him, and he is at heart a really nice guy, but he's a little awkward, and his life isn't exactly together. So a stable foundation for her can't really be built. One day she meets an older, frequent, wealthy customer at the Saks named Ray, played by Steve Martin. He's obviously a lot older than her, but they start a relationship similar to Pedro Pascal's character in The Materialists. He seems like the perfect guy for her on paper who can serve her a life of luxury and offer her security. Additionally, they are both men living a life of lonely materialistic existence. Again, Steve Martin's character is not a bad guy. I would actually say that Pedro Pascal's character in The Materialists is a little more likable than that of Steve Martin's, but their relationship is built off of materialistic means. While Steve Martin and Claire Danes' characters are together, Schwartzman's character goes through a personal transformation arc as he helps out like a band on tour. He reads self-help and relationship advice books, and it's really funny. And there's one scene where after he's reading a relationship self-advice a relationship book, he leaves Claire Danes a message saying, I might have objectified you a bit. Similar to the relationship between Dakota Johnson and Chris Evans' characters, the relationship between Claire Danes and Jason Schwartzman is more based on appreciating each other's quirky personalities and humor. Moreover, Chris Evans and Jason Schwartzman's characters have to learn how to take care of themselves. Additionally, both Dakota Johnson and Claire Danes' characters reevaluate what defines their personal worth. Materialist takes a tonal shift that some viewers were uncomfortable with. I understand why, but I liked it because I found it, different. I found it surprising, and it touched on a real thing that could happen in the world of dating and matchmakers. I won't get into specific spoilers, but that particular event reminded me of a legal thriller. At the beginning of the film, she actually celebrates a 9th wedding she helped in terms of matchmaking, and it sort of made me think of how in some movies lawyers sometimes celebrate victories for winning cases. There's been some baffling discourse surrounding this movie, as I alluded to earlier. I think the blunt commentary on the superficiality of commodity-based dating struck a blunt chord with some viewers. On TikTok, some users called it hashtag broke man propaganda, which is a totally brain-dead take. That speaks to the materialistic values that still run rampant in this country today. I have read and listened to not so favorable reviews of this movie, with points that are completely fair and valid. If you don't like this movie, that is okay. If you want to criticize the film for dialogue delivery, the narrative wrapping up too neatly, or the story sort of following a best friends fall in love rom-com formula, that is fair. It's the misogynistic remarks, particularly against attacking Celine's song as a person, that I find really disgusting. I'm curious to see how this movie ages over time. It is an encapsulation of how superficial values have, as I said, been accentuated through traditional age and have sadly existed for years and years. And hopefully, but at the end of the day, true love reigns supreme. Reigns supreme if you can choose to follow that side of your heart. Next up, I'm going to talk about, I have 2 movies, The Phoenician Scheme, the new Wes Anderson picture. I love this movie. Set in the 1950s, the narrative follows an international robber baron, business mogul, and arms dealer named Zsa Zsa Corda, played by Benicio del Toro. He names, of his 10 estranged children, his only daughter Liesl, played by Kate Winslet's daughter Mia Threepleton, who was outstanding in this movie, a nun, his estate heir. Zsa Zsa's next mission is to have a dam, a tunnel, and a canal built, and they go on a journey to collect money from donors with assassins on their tail. On their adventure, they are joined by an entomologist named Bjorn, played by Michael Cera. It becomes an international madcap espionage chase with assassins, terrorists, and other tycoons. Zsa Zsa has targets on his back due to his past business ethics, which weren't exactly 100% ethical. What we get is a really touching father-daughter story and a cute love story between Michael Cera and Mia Threepleton's characters. While it has a big cast, the movie is mainly a 3-hander with Benicio, Mia Threepleton, and Michael Cera. All 3 give excellent performances. I was intrigued by the political angle and critique of capitalism and oligarchies Wes Anderson did here. It is interesting to see how this year some auteurs, including Wes Anderson, with this Paul Thomas Anderson with One Battle After Another coming up, and Astor with Eddington, and Yorgos Lanthimos with Begonia, since it touches on conspiracy theories and environmentalism. Wes Anderson was recently interviewed by Ari Melber on MSNBC, and he said that he researched different business moguls from the 50s. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Anderson stated that Zaza was heavily inspired by his wife's father, Fouad Malouf, who was a Lebanese businessman. The San Fernando Chronicle actually has an obituary on him, and there's even a dedication to him at the end of the film. In the LA Times, Amy Nicholson states, but the character is more of a riff on the real-life Baron Carlos Gulbenkian, the world's richest man at the time of his death in 1955, and a template for today's globe-roaming magnates who pledge allegiance only to their own ambitions. Zaza shuns passports. Gulbenkian declined British knighthood. Zaza also has inherited Gulbenkian's moniker, Mr. 5%, and Nemesis, a half-brother Nubar, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who has the same name, beard, and horned eyebrows of Gulbenkian's son, a playboy, who was so incensed when his father refused to let him charge a $4.50 chicken lunch that he filled a $10 million lawsuit. Zaza is a complex character. While not all of his business morals are ethical, he is not painted as an evil mogul. While there are certainly disgusting moguls out there, Anderson's humanizing of him as a father who learns to love his daughter makes this more effective as a commentary of capitalism because it shows how business leaders can come to their senses rather than make matters all about themselves. In fact, Zaza's brother Nubar, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, is much worse of a titan than Zaza. Zaza's redemption arc made the father-daughter dynamic between Benicio del Toro and Mias Repleton truly touch me. Interestingly, I saw this at the Regal United Artists Farmingdale Theater after visiting the St. Charles Cemetery where my dad is. It was around Father's Day. We put a Father's Day flag there to honor my dad. Of course, Wes Anderson is no stranger to depicting family dynamics, particularly complicated ones. The Royal Tenenbaums is part of a ultimate dysfunctional family movie canon. Darjeeling Limited follows the Strange Brothers. Fantastic Mr. Fox is about a Fox family. Asteroid City features a father dealing with grief. I would compare Zaza's change of heart actually to that of Henry Sugar. Despite such themes being explored in multiple of his films, I strongly push back on the notion that Wes Anderson keeps doing the same thing over and over again. Such a take could not be any more brain dead. He tells a different narrative in each movie. I can't stress how disingenuous it is when people online claim they aren't big Wes Anderson fans so they can sound cool and edgy because it's not cool to like Wes Anderson anymore. My brother stated something that wasn't necessarily a criticism per se, but more so an observation. He pointed out how Wes Anderson's newer string of films this decade have been, or the past decade, have been much more dimensional than his earlier filmography, and he would like to see him return to such a stylistic choice of his previous filmography. This is not to say that he's not a fan of his recent works. He wasn't rubbing shade at all. At the end of the day, we both agree that Wes Anderson continues to be an excellent storyteller. Asteroid City was quite metaphysical as it delved into outer space and the afterlife. The Phoenician scheme goes into similar spiritual territory, which was a surprise to me because that element was hidden from the marketing. My brother said these scenes reminded him of a comedic take on Ingmar Bergman. I thought of Powell and Pressburger as a matter of life and death. One of the films that Wes Anderson brought up when discussing the films that inspired the Phoenician scheme was Louis Buñuel's discreet charm of the bourgeoisie. I also wonder if he was inspired by the film The Milky Way from 1969, or Viridiana for that matter. I haven't seen Viridiana, but I've seen The Milky Way. At the Cannes press conference, Wes Anderson announced that his next film he's co-writing with Roman Coppola, whom he wrote his last couple of films with, and Richard Ayoade, is going to be much darker. Most of his films have had moments of dark humor, but with how dark humor was used in the Phoenician scheme, I am super excited to see how he moves forward to delving into more of that territory. I'd even love to see him do something horror adjacent. And finally, this one is a bit of a cheat because it was Canada's submission to the international feature category and shortlisted, but ultimately did not make the cut. And that's Universal Language, written directed by Matthew Rankin. It wasn't released in the US until this year, so I'm counting it as a 2025 release. This is set in an absurdist surrealist comedy. This is a surrealist absurdist comedy set in an alternate world where Persian is the main language of Canada instead of English. People, however, still speak French in this version of Canada. The area of Canada this takes place in is Winnipeg. It definitely has an otherworldly feel to it. There are the three intersecting narratives in one story. Two young schoolgirls named Negin and Nazgul, I believe those are their names, tried to retrieve money trapped in ice in order to help purchase new glasses for a classmate of theirs who lost his glasses. Another story follows an oddball tour guide named Masood, played by Peruz Namadi. Third, a man named Matthew, played by Matthew Rankin, goes to visit his mother in his Winnipeg hometown. This heartfelt triptych is an ode to the importance and beauty of language and communication. The ensemble is fantastic, and I love the surrealist visual gags. Stylistically, it's like a mix of Wes Anderson and works by Iranian filmmakers such as Majid Majidi, Mohsen, Malcolm Ball, Jafar Panahi, and Abbas Kiarostami. On the Wes Anderson side of things, it has a vibrant color palette. On the Iranian cinema front, it focuses on individual situations that seem small on paper, but are big deals when it comes to those in the lower to middle to lower class. When two girls try to get money trapped in the ice, I thought of Jafar Panahi's The White Balloon, which is about a little girl who seeks help in trying to get money for a goldfish under a sewer in the street. In a way, the film plays out like an Jafar Panahi, who, by the way, just won the Palme d'Or for It Was Just an Accident, being released by Neon later this year. In a way, this film plays out like intersecting newspaper comic strips, and I mean that as a compliment. Somebody on Letterboxd described it as following cartoon logic. What's also interesting here is the different generations depicted. By showcasing these characters of different ages, young to old, Matthew Rankin depicts how no matter how old we are, communicating with each other is the best way to bring us together. Universal Language is currently available to watch on Canopy, and you can rent it for a few dollars on Prime. Oscilloscope will be releasing it on Blu-ray in the fall, and I love this movie to pieces. It's one of the most underrated movies in the past couple of years in my top 10 of 2025 so far. I'd love to see this get a Criterion release in years to come. So thank you so much for watching. That will do it for today's video. See you next time with more reviews. Goodbye for now.